At the label showcase, Monroe pointed at the second microphone beside Adrian Vale and asked, "Is this where Mira usually sings with you?" The room went quiet. That mic had been mine for 7 years. From dive bars with sticky floors to sold-out theaters, I had stood to Adrian's left for every acoustic closer. I wrote the lyrics, arranged the harmonies, booked the early gigs, and talked club owners into paying us when Adrian was too proud to ask. Everyone in the band knew that final song was ours. Adrian had once promised me that when we sold out our first arena, we would sing it together before he announced our engagement. But Lily only tilted her head and smiled, all nervous charm and pretty innocence. "Can I try her part?" Adrian looked at me for half a second. Then he handed her the spare in-ear monitor. "Go ahead." The rehearsal room went silent in the way people go silent when they know they have just watched someone get replaced. Lily stepped up to my microphone. Adrian leaned close to adjust the stand for her height, his hand lingering at her waist as he showed her where to come in on the chorus. The band looked anywhere but at me. That was the moment I realized Adrian Vale and I were over. After the showcase ended, Rachel, our tour manager, found me by the loading dock. The crew was packing amps into flight cases behind her, and someone was still laughing inside the green room. Rachel glanced over her shoulder before lowering her voice. "Mira, you don't need to come in for the acoustic rehearsal on Friday." I already knew what she was going to say. Still, my fingers tightened around the strap of my guitar case. Adrian wants Lily to sing The Last Firework with him. The Last Firework. My song. The first melody came from my mother. She used to hum it in motel laundry rooms when she worked night shifts, and thought I was asleep on a plastic chair beside the dryers. Years later, I turned it into lyrics in the back of our van while Adrian slept through another state line, too tired to notice me crying over the notebook in my lap. He knew what that song meant. He had heard the first demo in our kitchen, back when the fridge barely worked and our downstairs neighbor banged on the ceiling every time he sang too loud. He had held my hand after listening to it and said, "When we make it, this is the one we sing together." Now he was giving it to Lily because she had a soft voice, a pretty face, and the kind of fragile stage presence label executives love to protect. I nodded. "Thanks for telling me." Rachel looked like she wanted to say more, but the drummer walked past us with a cymbal case, and she only squeezed my arm before leaving. That night, I sat in my car outside the venue for almost 20 minutes before calling a number I had not touched in years. Nathaniel Reed answered on the 6th ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Mira." For a second, I said nothing. Then I looked through the windshield at the neon sign of the club where Adrian and I had once begged to play for free and asked, "You once told me that if I ever stopped confusing loyalty with love, you'd marry me at Royal Albert Hall. Did you mean it?" There was a pause. Then a heavy thud came through the phone, followed by a curse. I blinked. "Did you just fall out of bed?" "No," he said too quickly. "Despite everything," I laughed. Nathaniel took a breath. When he spoke again, he sounded fully awake. "Mira, say that again." "You can refuse." "Don't be ridiculous." His voice sharpened. "I meant it then. I mean it now. I'll mean it 10 years from now if you call me again." For the first time all day, the tightness in my chest loosened. When Adrian came home, I was folding clothes into a suitcase. He did not notice at first. He walked in with his shirt half unbuttoned, his hair still damp from the after-party, and the easy exhaustion of a man who expected someone else to clean up after every good night he had. "Do we have Tylenol?" he asked. "And can you get me some water?" Lily tried to keep up with the label people and almost passed out in the car. I looked at the pale pink lipstick near his collar. "Adrian," I said, "we're done." He paused. Only then did he notice the suitcase. "Is this about the mic?" I said nothing. He rubbed his temple. "Mira, come on." Lily was nervous. It was her first label showcase. I was helping her get comfortable. She sang my part. She tried a harmony. You gave her The Last Firework. It was one rehearsal. She missed the second verse. She has a tone people remember. She came in flat on the bridge. She has instinct. I looked at him for a moment. "So that's what you're calling it now." His patience thinned at once. "Don't be petty. I'm trying to keep the band alive." The way he said the band almost made me laugh. For 7 years, I had written the songs, handled the bookings, fixed the contracts, smoothed over his interviews, and stood beside him on stages so small the monitors barely worked. But when it was time to give credit, it was his band. When it was time to sacrifice something, it was always my place. I closed the suitcase. "You promised that at the anniversary show, we would announce the engagement." His face changed. "Mira, not this again." "Yes, this again." "The album is finally getting traction," he said. "The label is watching everything we do. We have festivals, radio, a tour to plan. I can't split my focus because you want a ring." I stared at him. He treated his focus like something too precious to waste on me. But somehow there was always room for Lily's nerves, Lily's mic level, Lily's hotel room, her throat spray, her stage fright. With me, everything became pressure. I'm tired, I said. Announce the engagement or let me go. Adrian laughed under his breath. Do you hear yourself? Do you know how desperate you sound? The word landed exactly where he wanted it to. After 7 years, that was what I had become to him. Desperate. I told you this isn't the time, he said. If you want to turn it into some grand tragedy, go ahead. I'm not chasing you every time you pack a bag. I held his gaze. So we're done. Fine. He threw his shirt onto the chair. Then we're done. He went into the bathroom and shut the door. A moment later, the shower started. I stood beside the bed for a while, listening to the water run. On my birthday, he forgot the date unless his assistant reminded him. When I was sick, he texted, drink water, and came home after midnight. When I sent him lyrics, he said they were good, then sang my best line in soundcheck like it had just come to him. I had forgiven all of it because I remembered the boy who cried in my lap after a record executive told him his voice was ordinary. But 7 years was long enough. I zipped the suitcase, picked up my coat, and left the keys on the dresser. By the time Adrian came out of the shower, I was gone. My phone started buzzing before I made it out of Adrian's driveway. At first, I thought he had come out of the shower and noticed I was gone. But when I pulled over at the end of the street, the notifications were all from the band group chat. Someone had posted a video from the label after party. In it, Lily sat beside Adrian on the small stage at the back of the bar, holding my microphone with both hands. She was singing the harmony from the last firework, the part one had sung with Adrian for 7 years. She missed the first entrance. Adrian laughed, leaned close, and sang the line into her ear so she could catch up. Their faces almost touched. The room broke into whistles and teasing applause, and Lily hit her face against his shoulder, as if she had not known exactly what she was doing. A minute later, she sent another message. First day with the band, and already stealing the best seat in the house. Guess the new girl gets better treatment than the 7-year veterans. Thank you, A, for believing in me. Adrian replied almost immediately. You earned it. Then he added a little star emoji. I stared at the screen until the car behind me honked. 3 years ago, I had written the chorus that got us our first radio play. That night, I tried to joke in the group chat like other girlfriends did. Do I get a gold star, Mr. Frontman? The message sat there all day. Adrian never replied. When I asked him about it later, he looked embarrassed for me. Mira, don't do that in front of the band. It makes us look childish. Back then, I thought maybe I had made things awkward. Now I watched him flirt with Lily in front of the same people, using the kind of silly message he had once made me feel ashamed for sending. It turned out Adrian was not too private. He just did not want to be that way with me. I turned off my phone and drove away. Over the next few days, I began handing off my work. I sent Rachel the updated tour calendar, forwarded venue contracts to Grant, and moved my lyrics, demos, and old voice notes into a private drive before anyone could quietly rename them as band material. I stopped answering Adrian's calls. When I had to go into the studio, I used the back entrance and left before rehearsals ended. Adrian and Lily became harder to avoid anyway. Her name appeared on revised set lists, radio prep notes, festival mood boards. By Friday, someone had taped a new rehearsal schedule to the studio door. Lily Monroe, acoustic closer with Adrian. I read it once, then kept walking. On Monday morning, my father called from Pasadena. His voice was low and strained. Mira, your mom woke up asking for the song. I stopped in the middle of the parking lot. The last firework? The old version, he said. The one you two made when you were little. She keeps saying she wants to hear it before she sleeps. My mother had been in hospice for 3 weeks. Some days she knew me. Some days she thought I was still 8 years old, sitting beside her in motel laundry rooms while she hummed over the sound of dryers. The melody that became the last firework had started there, between the heat of old machines and the smell of cheap detergent. When she tapped the rhythm against my knee and told me not to forget it. The original cassette was not with me. Adrian had it. 2 weeks earlier, he had taken the tape and my mother's signed release because the label wanted to digitize the recording for our anniversary show. He said it would be beautiful to open the acoustic set with my mother's voice before we sang the finished version together. I had trusted him with it. I had asked for it back twice. Both times, he told me Grant was handling it. Dad, I'll get it, I said, already reaching for my keys. Keep her awake if you can. I'm coming. I called Adrian on the way to his house. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. By the 6th call, my hands were shaking against the steering wheel. I sent one text. My mother is asking for the old tape. I need it now. Answer me. The message showed delivered. No reply. Adrian's house sat behind a white gate in the hills. I had lived there for 4 years, though my name had never been on the deed because Adrian said it was cleaner with the label, the press, and the taxes. I used to believe him when he said things like that. The gate code had been changed. So had the front door code. For a moment, I stood there staring at the keypad, wasting seconds I did not have. Then I remembered the side window by the laundry room. The one Adrian kept saying he would fix after the tour. It was locked now. I broke it with a stone from the garden. The alarm started screaming the second I climbed in, but I ignored it and ran to Adrian's office. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. The house looked different. A pink suitcase lay open beside the guest room. A curling iron sat on the bathroom counter. Glittery heels had been kicked under the couch. On the dining table, beside Adrian's neat stack of vinyl proofs and tour passes, Lily's marked-up lyrics were spread out in pink highlighter. My lyrics. The last firework, with hearts drawn around the chorus and little notes in the margin. Make this softer. Ask if I can sing this line alone. I thought of the yellow lamp I had once bought at a flea market because it looked like something from my mother's old apartment. Adrian had taken one look at it and said, "Please don't bring that cheap-looking thing into my house." Now Lily's things were everywhere, and somehow his house had survived. I forced myself into the office. The cassette was not on his desk. Not in the drawers. Not in the cabinet where he kept contracts he never read. I checked the shelf beside the safe, then the black case where he kept hard drives from studio sessions. Nothing. I was still searching when the office door burst open. 2 officers came in with security behind them. Hands where we can see them. I tried to explain, but one of them pushed me against the wall before I got more than a sentence out. I used to live here, I said, my cheek pressed hard to the plaster. My mother is in hospice. Adrian has her tape. I need to find it. The officer looked at the broken window, the open drawers, and the papers scattered on the desk. Ms. Monroe reported a break-in, he said. She said Mr. Vale has a former employee who has been unstable and may be trying to access private band files. She's lying. Then you can explain that at the station. At the station, they took my phone and bag. I told them I had lived with Adrian for years. They said Lily had told them I moved out and had no permission to enter. I told them I was a co-founder of the band's company. They said Grant had confirmed my role was being reviewed and that Lily was now attached to the upcoming acoustic set. I told them my mother was dying and wanted to hear a tape that belonged to her. They told me to wait. Through the glass, I saw my phone light up on the officer's desk. Dad. It rang until it stopped, then lit up again with his name. By the time someone came back to speak to me, my throat hurt from asking. Please, I said. My mother is in hospice. She's waiting for me. Let me call my father. The officer glanced at the file. Mr. Vale is unreachable, and Ms. Monroe says they need to inventory the house before deciding how to proceed. She doesn't own the house. She made the report. My mother could die tonight. He looked at me with the flat patience of someone who had heard too many emergencies. Then you shouldn't have broken a window. I sat back down. For the rest of the day, I watched my father's calls flash across my phone while Adrian stayed unreachable, and Lily decided what was missing from a house she had entered yesterday. It was close to midnight when the door finally opened. Adrian walked in wearing a black coat, sunglasses pushed into his hair, and the expression of a man pulled away from something more important. Lily followed half a step behind him. Adrian looked annoyed when he walked into the station. Lily followed behind him in one of his oversized hoodies, her hair loose around her face. She stayed close to his side, quiet and pale, like she had been the one sitting under fluorescent lights for hours while her father's calls kept flashing on a phone she was not allowed to touch. Adrian took one look at me and frowned. Was this really necessary? My throat was raw from asking the officer for my phone. My mother is in hospice, I said. I called you 9 times. I was in rehearsal. You didn't answer my text. His jaw tightened. Because I didn't think you'd break into my house. I needed the tape. You could have asked. I did ask. Lily's eyes filled at once. Adrian. I'm sorry. The alarm went off, and security called me because I was still at the house. I saw the office drawers open and I panicked. Adrian looked at her first. That tiny movement told me enough. The officer brought over a form. Mr. Vale has agreed not to press charges for now. Ms. Lane will be released after signing the warning. She is not to return to the property without permission. Adrian signed without reading. I held out my hand. My phone. The officer gave it back. There were 27 missed calls from my father. The last voicemail was from 40 minutes ago. I pressed play. Mira. My father's voice broke on my name. She waited as long as she could. I played the little recording from my phone, but she kept asking for the real one. She kept saying you'd bring it. Honey, she's gone. I'm so sorry. For a moment, I could not move. The station kept going around me. Phone is rang. Someone laughed near the front desk. An officer walked past with a coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. Adrian's irritation finally slipped. Mira. I looked up at him. Where is the tape? He frowned. What? My mother's cassette. The release form. The drive you said Grant was digitizing. Where is it? His expression changed. I gave it to Grant. You gave my mother's only original recording to your manager? He was handling the anniversary package. Did he send it back? Adrian did not answer. Lily glanced between us, then said softly, I thought Grant said you were saving the original for the showcase. Adrian turned toward her too late. I stared at him. You kept my mother's tape for a showcase? It wasn't like that. She was asking for that song before she died. His face went still. Lily covered her mouth. Mira, I didn't know. Don't. She stopped. Adrian reached for my arm, but I stepped back. I didn't know it was that urgent, he said. You didn't know because you didn't pick up the phone. He swallowed. You said she had good days and bad days. She was in hospice. You should have told me clearly. My text said my mother was asking for the old tape and I needed it now. How much clearer did it need to be? Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had nothing ready. No excuse, no joke, no way to make the room believe he had only been misunderstood. After a long silence, he lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. The apology came quietly, almost stiffly, as if he was not used to saying it without turning it into someone else's fault. I used to wait for those words. After forgotten dinners, missed calls, bad interviews I had cleaned up for him, lyrics he sang like they had come from nowhere, I used to think one real apology would make the years feel less foolish. Now it only made me tired. You should be sorry, I said. His face tightened. For a moment, he looked like he understood there was nothing left to fix. Then he looked at me the way he looked at a bad show before the encore, still convinced the night could be saved if he chose the right song. Let me make it up to you. I said nothing. I know this isn't the right time, he said quickly. But next week is your birthday. I froze. Adrian noticed. His voice grew gentler. I booked the private room at San Vicente weeks ago. It was supposed to be a surprise. Just dinner. You meet a few people from the label. Lily's fingers tightened around his sleeve. Adrian did not look at her. And Miles Hart will be there, he added. You always said he was the only producer you'd trust with your songs. I invited him for you. That name made me pause despite myself. Miles Hart had produced half the records I loved before I knew what production was. He was the kind of person who could hear a rough demo and know whether there was a career inside it. For years, I had tried to get one meeting with him and never made it past his assistant. On Sunday night, I still went to San Vicente. I told myself it was only because of Miles Hart. Adrian's apology had come too late, and whatever he called a birthday dinner no longer had anything to do with me. But Miles was the one producer I had tried for years to meet, and I was tired of losing opportunities just because Adrian had attached himself to them first. The private room was already half full when I arrived. Low lights, dark wood, expensive wine, people speaking in the careful voices industry people used when every sentence might become leverage later. Near the entrance, a small card with my name sat beside a vase of white roses. Happy birthday, Mira. For a second, it almost looked sincere. Then I saw the screen behind the small stage. The last firework. Acoustic release preview. Adrian's photo was on the left. Lily's was on the right. My name sat underneath in smaller letters. Written by Mira Lane. Technically, Adrian had kept his promise. That almost made it worse. A label assistant hurried over with a tablet. Mira, thank God. Adrian said you could check the final set order before we start. I looked at her. She froze, realizing too late that no one had told me I was supposed to work at my own birthday dinner. Before she could apologize, Adrian crossed the room toward me. You came. You said Miles Hart would be here. He is. Adrian glanced toward the back of the room. I'll introduce you after the first set. The first set. His expression shifted. It's just 2 songs. The label wanted to hear Lily on the acoustic arrangement. I looked past him. Lily stood near the stage in a pale slip dress, laughing with Grant and 2 label executives. Her hair was pinned loosely, her makeup soft, her hand resting on my microphone stand like she already belonged there. So this is her showcase. It's a preview, Adrian said. Don't make it ugly. There it was again. Whenever something hurt me, he called it ugly. Miles Hart was seated near the back with a glass of water in front of him. Silver hair, black jacket, the kind of calm face that made everyone around him look louder than they were. I had wanted 10 minutes with him for years. So I swallowed what I wanted to say and stayed. Dinner began. Adrian made a short toast, mentioning my birthday only after he thanked the label, the band, the radio team, and everyone who believed in the next chapter. People clapped. Someone near me said happy birthday. Lily smiled from beside him, as if she were generous for allowing it. Then Adrian picked up his guitar. Lily stepped to the second microphone. The microphone I had used for 7 years. Adrian looked at the room. We wanted to share a new version of The Last Firework tonight. Lily brought something fresh to it, something I think the song needed. My fingers went cold around the stem of my glass. He started playing. At first, the arrangement was familiar. Softer than mine, slower, built for Lily's breathy voice. She came in on the first verse and missed the lower note, but Adrian covered her easily. Then she reached the bridge and sang a line that was never in the released version. When the last firework fades, promise me you'll still look at the sky. The room blurred for a second. That was my mother's line. She had sung it into the old cassette when I was 8, half laughing because the dryer in the motel laundry room was too loud, and I kept missing the rhythm. It was not in any lyric sheet. It was not in any demo I had sent the band. It was only on the tape Adrian had kept. Lily finished the song to warm applause. Grant looked pleased. The label executives nodded. Miles Hart leaned back in his chair, unreadable. Adrian stood beside Lily, proud enough that something inside me finally snapped. Wait. The room quieted. I stood. That bridge isn't Lily's. It came from my mother's old tape. Lily's face changed for less than a second before her eyes filled. Mira, she said softly, I know this song is emotional for you, especially right now, but Adrian gave me the tape as reference. I thought we were all trying to honor your mother. You sang an unreleased line from her recording, and let everyone think you brought something fresh to it. I never said I wrote it. You didn't correct him either. Adrian set the guitar down. Mira, not here. Where then? In the house where you locked away her tape? At the station where I missed my father's calls. The room went still. Grant cleared his throat. Maybe we should take this outside. No, I said. I have the transcript. I had asked my father to send me the photo of the old notebook that morning. The page was shaky, half-smudged, but it had my mother's handwriting and the line Lily had just sung. I opened it on my phone. Lily stepped closer, her voice trembling just enough for the room to hear. If you have proof, show it. I'll apologize. Adrian looked at her, then at me. For once, he seemed unsure which version of the night would hurt him less. The label assistant connected my phone to the screen. My mother's notebook appeared behind the stage. Evelyn Lane, 2008. When the last firework fades, promise me you'll still look at the sky. A murmur moved through the room. Lily went pale. Before anyone could speak, a message dropped down from the top of the screen. Nathaniel Reed. Royal Albert Hall confirmed the private ceremony slot. The program is locked. The room went quiet. Reed Music Group? Someone whispered near the bar. They back half the serious rooms in London. And Royal Albert Hall? Another voice murmured. What ceremony is she talking about? I looked up at the screen, then at Adrian. For the first time all night, he was not looking at Lily. He was staring at Nathaniel's name. He's the one who backed the Blue Harbor tour last year, right? And the Royal Albert Hall residency. The room shifted. A minute ago, they had been watching me like I was the jealous ex-girlfriend ruining Adrian Vale's showcase. Now they were looking at the screen, then at me, trying to decide whether the message was real. Lily recovered first. She gave a small laugh, soft enough to sound embarrassed for me. Mira, she said. You don't have to do this. I looked at her. Do what? Pretend Nathaniel Reed is planning some kind of ceremony with you. Her eyes moved around the room, making sure everyone heard. I know you're hurt, but dragging someone like him into this is a lot. A few people murmured. Adrian still had not spoken. His face was dark, his eyes fixed on Nathaniel's name. He knew exactly who Nathaniel Reed was. Everyone in that room did. Reed Music Group backed venues, publishing deals, festival stages, and enough private rooms in enough cities to make or stall a career without raising its voice. Adrian had spent years trying to get near that circle. I picked up my phone before another notification could drop down. My hands were steadier than I expected. I sent Nathaniel one message. What ceremony? His reply came almost immediately. The one you asked me for, Mira. Unless you've changed your mind. A second later, another message followed. And I would rather not list Vale anywhere near you, but I promised to ask. I stared at the screen and exhaled. Of course. Nathaniel had always had a way of turning impossible things into calendar items. 3 nights ago, when I called him from the car and asked whether he had meant what he said about Royal Albert Hall, I thought I was clinging to an old joke, something reckless and half-broken that only sounded brave, because I had nothing left to lose. Nathaniel had taken it seriously. He had booked the hall. Lily was still smiling, but it had started to strain at the edges. Well, she asked, are you going to tell everyone Nathaniel Reed is marrying you now? The way she said marrying made a few people laugh. It was the wrong kind of laugh this time. Uncertain. Careful. Adrian finally looked at me. Turn off the screen, he said to the assistant. The assistant fumbled with the connection, and the display went black. But the room had already seen enough. Adrian crossed the space between us, his voice low. What the hell are you doing? I was showing proof that Lily used my mother's line. You know what I mean. I slipped my phone into my bag. Then say it clearly. His jaw tightened. Nathaniel Reed is not someone you use to make a point. I almost laughed. That's what you're worried about. I'm worried you're humiliating yourself. There it was again. Not that Lily had sung from my mother's tape. Not that he had kept that tape for a showcase while my mother was dying. Not that the entire room had just seen proof. He was worried about the part that embarrassed him. Adrian stepped closer, blocking the room from me as if privacy could be created by standing in the way. Do you understand who he is? He said. People like Nathaniel don't get involved in drama like this. If you made him part of some revenge act, you're going to regret it. Revenge act? You left my house, called him, and now there's some ceremony at Royal Albert Hall? He gave a short, humorless laugh. Mira, come on. Lily stood a few feet behind him, her eyes bright again. Adrian, she said gently, maybe don't push her. She's clearly not thinking straight. I looked past Adrian at her. You should be more worried about the tape. Her expression flickered. Miles' heart spoke before she could answer. I'd like to hear the original recording. The room quieted. Grant shifted in his chair. Miles, this probably isn't the best time. It seems like the only useful time, Miles said. His gaze stayed on me. If the line came from Evelyn Lane's tape, the arrangement needs to be cleared properly. And credited properly. Lily's face went pale again. Adrian looked cornered for the first time that night. This is getting out of hand, he said. No, Miles replied. This is what happens when no one handles the song like it belongs to the person who wrote it. That sentence landed harder than I expected. For 7 years, I had heard people call my work Adrian's sound, Adrian's instinct, Adrian's emotional honesty. I had watched my lyrics become his interviews, my arrangements become his genius, my silence become his clean story. Now one person in the room had said it plainly. The song belonged to me. Adrian heard it too. His mouth tightened. Lily's eyes filled again, but nobody moved to comfort her this time. I picked up my coat. Mira, Adrian said. I stopped. His voice changed, softening in a way that would have once made me stay. Don't walk out like this. I looked at him. For 7 years, I had wanted him to say that. I had wanted him to ask me to stay in a room full of people, to choose me when it mattered, to stop pretending that I was just part of the machine that kept him shining. Now he was saying it, because Nathaniel Reed's name had appeared on a screen. Too late. Lily stepped beside him, no longer bothering to hide her panic. Adrian, are you really going to let her ruin the release over one line? One line. My mother's last song had become one line. I turned back to Adrian. If I told you I'm really marrying him, I said, would you still think this was about you? The room went silent. Adrian stared at me, the color slowly draining from his face. Lily's mouth parted. Someone near the back whispered, marrying Nathaniel Reed? I did not wait for the next question. I walked out before anyone could turn my life into another discussion around Adrian Vale's table. The night air outside San Vicente was cold, thick with the smell of wet pavement and eucalyptus from the hills. My boots made a sharp, hollow sound against the brick patio as I stepped out past the valet stand. I didn't call an Uber. I didn't reach for my phone. I stood under the dark green awning, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my coat, watching the taillights of expensive cars streak down the boulevard. A sleek black sedan pulled smoothly to the curb. The back door opened before the car even came to a complete stop. Nathaniel Reed stepped out into the faint glow of the street lamp. He didn't wear a heavy coat despite the chill, just a dark tailored suit, open-collared, charcoal shirt, and that quiet, immovable presence that had always made rooms feel slightly smaller the moment he entered them. He didn't glance at the restaurant door. He didn't look for photographers. He looked straight at me. You took your time, Nathaniel said, his voice low and warm against the cold air. I stopped 3 feet from him. You were sitting around the corner? I was parked across the street, he corrected simply. I told you 7 years ago that if you ever walked away from him, I'd be waiting at the curb. Did you think I was lying? A small, breathless laugh caught in my throat. My eyes burned, but no tears came. I was too tired for tears, my ribs aching with the sudden terrifying release of letting go of something I had carried until my fingers bled. He kept the tape, Nathaniel. I whispered, the words barely carrying over the distant hum of traffic. He gave it to her. She sang my mother's line. Nathaniel's expression didn't flare into loud anger. It did something far worse. It went completely motionless. His eyes hardened into cold gray stone. I know, he said gently. Miles texted me 3 minutes ago. Miles. Who do you think convinced Miles to sit in that room tonight? Nathaniel stepped closer, reaching out to take my suitcase, the one I had thrown into the trunk of my car 3 days ago and hadn't opened since. He lifted it effortlessly and placed it in his trunk. Then he held open the passenger door. For me. Get in, Mira. It's cold. I looked back once at the warm, amber glass windows of San Vicente. Through the sheer curtains, I could see the silhouette of the band, Grant pacing with a phone glued to his ear, Lily sitting on the corner of the small stage with her head in her hands, and Adrian standing by the door, staring out at the street like a man who had just realized his house was on fire, but couldn't remember where he'd put the hose. I got into Nathaniel's car. The door shut with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud, cutting off the city entirely. As we pulled away from the curb, Nathaniel didn't ask me what had happened inside. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply reached into the console, pulled out a small silver flask, and handed it to me. Single malt, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. The good stuff. Drink it. I took a small sip. The whiskey burned down my throat, liquid fire spreading. through the cold stone in my chest. The ceremony, I said, leaning my head back against the leather headrest. At Royal Albert Hall. You were serious? Nathaniel turned the car onto the freeway, his hands loose and steady on the wheel. I've never made a joke to you in my life, Mira Lane, he said softly. The hall is booked for the 24th. The publisher's showcase is scheduled for the same night. Everyone who matters in London will be in that room. If we sign the papers on that stage, your catalog is legally protected under Reed Music Group's global umbrella before Adrian's label can even file their quarterly registration. I stared at his profile in the faint dashboard light. You're turning my marriage into a corporate defense strategy. Nathaniel glanced at me, a faint, razor-sharp smile touching the corner of his lips. I'm turning your marriage into an unyielding fortress, he corrected quietly. So no one ever steals your mother's words again. But if you want it to be real, I've been ready for that for 7 years. My breath hitched. The car glided smoothly into the dark expanse of the highway, leaving the neon glow of the boulevard far behind. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the music industry was already tearing itself apart over the carcass of Adrian Vale's reputation. I woke up in the guest suite of Nathaniel's house in Bel Air. It was a sprawling, quiet estate surrounded by high stone walls and ancient oak trees, a stark contrast to the cramped, noisy hill house I had shared with Adrian. When I walked down to the kitchen, sunlight was streaming across the white marble island. Nathaniel was sitting there with a cup of black coffee, 3 tablets laid out before him, and a stack of printed legal documents. Good morning, he said, without looking up from his screen. You slept 7 hours. That's a record for you. What's happening? I asked, my voice slightly raspy. He slid one of the tablets toward me. The headline on Billboard read, Legal dispute halts Adrian Vale's acoustic. Release after unreleased archive controversy. Below it was an article detailing how Miles Hart had formally withdrawn from producing Adrian's upcoming project, citing unresolved intellectual property rights regarding foundational source materials. Miles did that. I blinked. Miles is an artist, Nathaniel said dryly, taking a sip of his coffee. He hates thieves. More importantly, he hates stupid thieves who steal from dead mothers. What about the label? Nathaniel pulled the second tablet closer. Grant has spent the last 5 hours trying to claim that the tape was a collaborative gift given to the band during your tenure as a co-songwriter. He tried to argue that because Adrian covered your living expenses for 4 years, the band owned implied license to any home recordings brought into the residence. A cold spike of anger shot through me. Covered my living expenses? I wrote 70% of the publishing catalog. My royalties paid the down payment on his house. I know, Nathaniel said softly. His hand reached across the marble and rested over mine. His palm was warm, solid, and entirely grounding. Which is why my legal team filed a preemptive injunction at 6 a.m. Every master track containing your voice, your arrangement, or your mother's tape has been frozen under a temporary cease and desist. My phone, sitting beside the coffee pot, began to vibrate. It had been vibrating continuously since 7 a.m., but I had left it on silent. I looked at the screen. 14 missed calls, Adrian Vale. 8 missed calls, Grant. 3 missed calls, Rachel. 1 text message, Lily Monroe. I clicked on Lily's text. Mira, please call me. This was all a massive misunderstanding. Adrian told me, you approved the bridge. I would never have sung it if I knew. The label is dropping my single prep, and the press is attacking me online. Please tell them the truth. I stared at the message for a long moment, then slowly hit delete. She's scared, I said quietly. She should be, Nathaniel replied coldly. She built her entire strategy on the assumption that you were a passive ghost who would quietly vanish into the background while she wore your clothes and sang your parts. She didn't calculate that you might actually stand up. He stood up, clearing his coffee cup, and looked down at me with an expression that was terrifyingly focused. Pack your bags, Mira. I looked up. Where are we going? London, Nathaniel said. Our flight leaves at 2 o'clock. Miles Hart is already on a plane. We start tracking your solo record at Abbey Road on Thursday. My heart hammered against my ribs. Abbey Road. Studio 2, Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave, rich and absolute. Where real musicians go when they stop playing dive bars with men who steal their notebooks. The flight across the Atlantic felt like crossing a boundary between 2 different lives. While we were 5,000 feet above the ocean, the storm back in Los Angeles broke wide open. Rachel, our old tour manager, finally managed to get an email through to my personal account. Attached was a leaked recording from the San Vicente dinner. A 20-second audio clip someone had recorded on their phone. In the clip, my voice rang out sharp and clear. That bridge isn't Lily's. It came from my mother's old tape. Then came Lily's breathy, trembling panic. I thought we were all trying to honor your mother. Followed by Miles' heart's dry, crushing voice. This is what happens when no one handles the song like it belongs to the person who wrote it. The clip went viral on social media within hours. Hashtag Justice for Mira and hashtag The Last Firework were trending globally. The narrative Adrian's team had spent weeks carefully spinning, that I was an unstable, jealous ex-girlfriend clinging to a band that had outgrown me, shattered into 1,000 irréparables pièces. Commenters dissected the audio with surgical precision. Did you hear Miles' heart? He literally called Adrian a thief to his face in front of the entire label. Lily Monroe really sang a dying woman's unreleased cassette line and tried to pretend it was her fresh perspective? Yikes. Wait, so Mira wrote all their hits and her mother provided the core melody for their biggest song. What did Adrian actually do besides unbutton his shirt? I closed the laptop and leaned my head against the cold glass of the airplane window. Nathaniel sat beside me, reading a leather-bound score. He didn't gloat over the press reports. He didn't boast about his legal maneuvers. He simply reached over, adjusted the blanket over my shoulders, and placed a warm cup of chamomile tea in my hand. Are you sad? He asked softly, without turning the page. I looked down at the tea. I'm sad that I wasted 7 years, I admitted, my voice barely audible over the hum of the jet engines. I'm sad that I let him make me feel small for so long that I thought I deserved it. Nathaniel set the score down on his lap. He turned his head to look at me, his dark eyes fierce and steady in the dim cabin light. You were young, Mira. And you loved him. Loving someone who drains you isn't a crime. It's just a mistake you only make once. He reached out, his long fingers gently catching my jaw, tilting my face toward his thumb brushed lightly over my cheekbone. From now on, Nathaniel whispered, every note you write belongs to you. Every stage you stand on will have your name on the marquee. And if anyone ever tries to take your microphone again, I'll tear their world down brick by brick. My throat tightened. For 7 years, I had been the one smoothing over Adrian's rough edges, defending his temper, building his foundation while he took the light. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand in front of me, like a shield. I laid my hand over his on my jaw, feeling the strong, steady pulse under his thing. Thank you, Nathaniel. Don't thank me yet, he murmured, a rare, breathtaking smile softening his sharp features. We still have a wedding to rehearse. London in late autumn was dark, crisp, and beautiful. Abbey Road Studio 2 smelled of vintage mahogany, valve amplifiers, old wool carpets, and 50 years of legendary music. When I stepped into the room on Thursday morning, Miles' heart was already there. He was sitting at the giant Neve mixing console, a mug of black tea in his hand, listening to a rough acoustic guitar track through the massive studio monitors. He didn't waste time on small talk. Lane, Miles grunted, nodding toward the glass booth. Get in there. We're tracking the original arrangement of The Last Firework. The way your mother hummed it. I stared at the booth. Inside, on a wooden stand, sat a vintage Neumann U47 microphone, the same model my mother had used in her brief, forgotten radio sessions back in the 70s. Beside the stand was my acoustic guitar, freshly tuned, its wooden body gleaming under the warm overhead spotlights. I walked into the booth, the heavy double-door ceiling shut behind me. The silence inside was absolute, a thick, velvet quiet where you could hear your own heartbeat. Through the glass, I saw Nathaniel sitting on the leather couch in the back of the control room. He caught my eye, gave a single, slow nod, and folded his hands. Miles's voice came through my in-ear monitors. Whenever you're ready, Mira. No. Click track. Just play it from the memory. I closed my eyes. I didn't think about Adrian. I didn't think about Lily. I didn't think about the label showcase or the broken window at the house in the hills. I thought about the smell of cheap powdered detergent and hot metal in a motel laundry room in Phoenix. I thought about my mother's worn canvas sneakers, tapping against the linoleum floor, keeping time against the heavy thud of the washing machine. I struck the first chord. It wasn't the polished, radio-friendly pop-rock chord Adrian had forced onto the track. It was minor, open, haunting, a melody that sounded like late-night rain on a tin roof. I sang the first verse. My voice filled the booth, rich, clear, and unburdened by the quiet, breathy restraint I had used for 7 years, so I wouldn't overpower Adrian's limited vocal range. I let my voice open up, rising into the rafters of the historic studio, raw and soaring. When I reached the bridge, my mother's bridge, I sang the line slowly, letting every word bleed with the 15 years of grief and love I had kept buried inside. When the last firework fades, promise me you'll still look at the sky. When the final chord faded into the acoustic dampening of the room, I stood still for a long moment, my eyes closed, my fingers resting on the quiet Strings. A soft click sounded in my monitor. Miles didn't say it was good. He didn't say it was brilliant. His voice came through unusually thick. That's the take. Don't touch a damn thing. I looked through the glass. Miles was wiping his glasses with his handkerchief. Beside him, Nathaniel stood up from the couch. He wasn't looking at the mixing board. He was looking at me, his eyes dark, intense, and filled with a pride so fierce it made my knees feel weak. I walked out of the booth. Before I could say anything, the control room door burst open. Nathaniel's assistant, a sharp young woman named Clara, rushed in holding an iPad. Mr. Reed, Clara said quickly, her face pale. Adrian Vale just landed at Heathrow. He's at the front gate. The iron gates of Abbey Road Studios were surrounded by a small crowd of music journalists and local fans who had tracked down the rumors of my recording session. Adrian stood near the security booth, wearing a black leather jacket, his dark hair disheveled by the London rain. He looked exhausted, pale, and desperate, the posture of a frontman who had realized the spotlight was moving away from him and didn't know how to pull it back. Beside him stood Grant, holding a leather briefcase, pacing frantically on the wet pavement. When Nathaniel and I walked out the heavy front doors of the studio building, the reporters' cameras began flashing instantly over the fence. Mira, Adrian shouted, stepping toward the security barrier. Mira, please. 5 minutes. Nathaniel stopped at the top of the stone steps, his hand resting lightly against the small of my back. You don't have to talk to him, he said quietly. I can have security remove them from the street in 2 minutes. I looked at Adrian across the wet courtyard. 2 weeks ago, the sight of him looking so broken would have ripped my heart out. I would have run down those steps, made excuses for him, and taken the blame just to stop him from hurting. Now looking at him, I felt only a strange, cold detachment, like looking at an old coat I had outgrown years ago. No, I said softly to Nathaniel. Let him speak. I want him to say whatever he came to say in front of the cameras. Nathaniel's lips twitched into a subtle, approving curve. As you wish. We walked down the steps together. The security guard opened the gate just enough for us to stand under the stone archway, protected from the rain by the heavy roof. Adrian rushed forward, stopping 3 feet away, his breathing ragged. Mira, he rasped, ignoring Nathaniel entirely. Thank God. I've been trying to call you for 4 days. My calls won't go through. I blocked your number, Adrian, I said calmly. His jaw twitched. Mira, listen to me. The whole thing has gone off the rails. The label suspended our album release. Miles walked off the project. Lily's manager is threatening to sue us for reputational damage because of the press leak. That sounds like a management problem, I said. You should talk to Grant. Grant ruined it. Adrian yelled, his voice cracking with a sudden ugly desperation. He was the one who told me to give Lily the bridge. He said it would create a narrative for her launch. I didn't know it was your mother's tape, Mira. I swear to God I didn't know. I looked at him with plain disgust. You knew, I said softly. You took the tape from my hands 2 weeks ago. You saw my mother's signature on the cassette box. You just didn't care because you thought I would never leave you. Adrian took a step closer, his eyes wide, reaching out to grab my hand. Mira, please, come back to LA. We can fix this. I'll fire Lily. I'll fire Grant. We can release the last firework as a duet, just like we planned. I'll put your name first on the credits. I'll give you 50% of the publishing. A small, genuine laugh escaped my lips. 50%? I repeated, shaking my head. Adrian, I wrote the entire song. My mother wrote the melody. Why would I settle for 50% of my own life? Because we are a team. Adrian pleaded, his voice rising, loud enough for the reporters behind him to record every word. 7 years, Mira. You can't just throw away 7 years for some business deal with Reed Music Group. He finally glares at Nathaniel, his frustration boiling over into bitter rage. You think he cares about you? Adrian spat, pointing a finger at Nathaniel's chest. He's using you. He's using your catalog to get a foothold in the domestic indie publishing market. The second your record drops, he'll dump you. Just like every other artist he backs. Nathaniel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took a step forward, placing himself between Adrian and me, his tall frame completely blocking Adrian from my sight. Mr. Vale, Nathaniel said, his voice quiet, smooth, and laced with absolute lethality. You are currently standing on private studio property, speaking to the future vice chair of Reed Music Group's publishing division. Adrian froze. What? Mira didn't just sign a recording contract with me, Nathaniel said, pulling a leather document folder from his coat and handing it to Grant, who stood gaping in the rain. She acquired 51% of the master rights to her entire catalog, including every track you ever recorded together. As of 8 a.m. this morning, my legal team has issued a formal notice of license revocation. You are legally barred from performing, recording, or streaming any song written or co-written by Mira Lane. Grant opened the folder, his hands shaking as he scanned the legal injunctions. This is an execution order, Grant whispered, his face turning gray. Adrian, we can't play the festival tour. We don't own the set list. Adrian stared at Nathaniel, his chest heaving, his mouth moving without sound. You destroyed my band, Adrian choked out. No, Mr. Vale, Nathaniel replied calmly, taking my hand in his and turning his back on them. You destroyed your band the moment you mistook the person who built your house for a carpet you could walk on. The week leading up to the 24th of November was a whirlwind of music, velvet dresses, legal filings, and late-night rehearsals under the grand Victorian arches of Royal Albert Hall. While Adrian's team released a frantic, desperate press statement claiming they were restructuring their musical direction, the industry saw right through it. Without my songs, Adrian Vale's upcoming tour was cancelled by venue promoters due to breach of performance contracts. Lily Monroe quietly vanished from his social media pages, her manager issuing a brief note stating she was focusing on her personal wellness. Meanwhile, London was preparing for the event of the season. The Royal Albert Hall Showcase was no longer just an industry publishing event. It had become the official public debut of Mira Lane as a solo artist, and the formal celebration of her partnership with Nathaniel Reid. On the afternoon of the 24th, I stood in the grand dressing room, backstage at Royal Albert Hall. The room was filled with vases of white roses, hundreds of them, sent by venue directors, international publishers, and Miles Hart himself. I stood before the tall antique mirror, wearing a floor-length gown of deep crimson silk, hand-embroidered with delicate silver threads along the train. The bare skin of my back felt smooth and cool, and around my neck hung a thin platinum chain holding a tiny, polished silver cassette charm, a gift Nathaniel had given me that morning. My hair was styled into soft, elegant waves that fell over one shoulder, revealing the sharp, high line of my cheekbones. For the first time in my life, I didn't look like a girl sitting in the shadow of a frontman. I looked like a queen preparing to claim her throne. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Nathaniel stepped inside. He wore a tailored black velvet tuxedo that highlighted his broad shoulders and commanding height. In his hand, he carried a small velvet box. He stopped near the door, his eyes sweeping over me, his breath catching visibly in his chest. Mira, he said softly, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely let the world see. You are magnificent. I turned toward him, the heavy silk of my dress rustling against the carpet. Is everything ready? The hall is completely full, Nathaniel murmured, walking slowly toward me. 5,000 people. Every major label head from London, New York, and Paris is in the royal boxes. Miles is already at the soundboard. He stopped in front of me, opening the velvet box in his hand. Inside sat a simple, breathtaking ring, a flawless, emerald-cut diamond set in a minimalist platinum band that caught the chandelier light with dazzling purity. This isn't for the press, Nathaniel whispered, looking into my eyes with an intensity that made my heart leap against my ribs. This isn't for the publishing rights, or the legal protection, or the showcase. He took the ring from the box, holding my hand gently in his. This is because I have loved you since the night I heard you sing in that broken dive bar in Austin 7 years ago, he said, his voice dropping to a low, desperate truth. I watched you give your light to a man who didn't know what it was worth. And I swore to God that if you ever turned to me, I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubted your own brilliance. Again, tears sprang to my eyes, not tears of grief or exhaustion, but pure overwhelming warmth. Nathaniel, I whispered, my voice trembling. Mira Lane, he murmured, sliding the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Will you marry me tonight? I reached up, wrapping my arms around his neck, pulling his face down to mine. Yes. I breathed against his lips. Yes. His mouth came down on mine in a kiss that was deep, possessive, and filled with 7 years of unspoken promise. His hands gathered the dark crimson silk at my waist, holding me flush against his chest as if he would never let the world touch me again. When he finally pulled back, his dark eyes were burning with a quiet, triumphant fire. Come, he whispered, holding out his hand. Let's go sing your song. The interior of Royal Albert Hall was a sea of warm golden light, roaring applause, and velvet-draped balconies filled with 5,000 expectant guests. The orchestra on stage was quiet, their instruments resting as the central spotlights narrowed down to a single wooden stool and a microphone stand. Beside the stage, standing in the shadows of the VIP gallery, sat a man who had paid $10,000 for a last-minute scalp ticket just to get into the building. Adrian Vale stood behind the plush red curtains, clutching a glass of warm Whiskey, his eyes fixed on the empty stage. He looked worn out, his designer jacket crumpled, his face hollowed by a week of public ruin. He watched as the house lights began to dim. The crowd went completely silent. Then I walked out. The crimson silk dress caught the single brilliant beam of the white spotlight, shining like liquid fire as I crossed the massive stage. The sheer majesty of the hall, the soaring organ pipes, the gilded balconies, the thousands of faces looking up at me, didn't make me feel small. It made me feel whole. The applause rose like thunder, echoing off the historic dome above. I stepped up to the microphone, my microphone. I sat on the wooden stool, adjusting the stand to my height, and placed my hands on the acoustic guitar resting across my lap. Near the side stage, Nathaniel stood in his velvet tuxedo, his hands resting easily in his pockets, his gaze locked onto me with absolute, quiet devotion. I leaned close to the microphone. "Good evening, London," I said softly. The crowd cheered. "This song was written 15 years ago in a motel laundry room," I murmured into the quiet hall, my voice carrying cleanly to the back row of the gallery. "It was written by a woman who spent her life working night shifts so her daughter could learn to play the guitar. Someone tried to steal her words. Someone tried to pretend her memory belonged to them." In the gallery shadows, Adrian flinched, pulling back into the dark curtain as if he had been slapped. "But words that come from truth can never be stolen," I continued, striking the first haunting minor chord. "This is the last firework." The orchestra behind me swept in, a soft, breathtaking bed of strings arranged by Miles' heart that lifted the acoustic guitar into something heavenly. I sang. My voice filled every corner of Royal Albert Hall. It was rich, soaring, magnificent, a voice that had been muted for 7 years, now breaking free into the open air with terrifying, beautiful power. When I reached the bridge, the strings rose to a magnificent crescendo, and I let my voice carry my mother's unreleased words straight into the rafters. "When the last firework fades, promise me you'll still look at the sky." The entire audience stood up. 5,000 people rose to their feet before the final chord had even finished decaying in the vast space. Cheering and applause erupted like a tidal wave. Miles' heart stood at the mixing board, clapping slowly, a rare, genuine smile on his weathered face. I stood up from the stool, bowing gracefully to the roaring hall. Nathaniel stepped out from the wings. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight across the stage, stopping in front of me, under the blinding white light. Before 5,000 guests, dozens of press cameras, and every record executive in the world, Nathaniel knelt on one knee, took my hand, and pressed his lips to my ring. The crowd went absolute wild. Flashbulbs exploded across the front rows like 1,000 falling stars. Nathaniel stood up, pulled me close by my waist, and kissed me deeply right there on the central mark of Royal Albert Hall. I wrapped my arms around his neck, laughing against his lips, feeling the roar of the crowd vibrate through the stage beneath our feet. Far back in the dark shadows of the VIP balcony, Adrian Vale set his empty glass on a ledge, turned his back on the glowing stage, and walked out into the cold London rain alone. 3 years later, the estate in the Cotswolds was quiet in the late afternoon sun. The stone house sat among rolling green hills, surrounded by wild lavender, ancient oaks, and a small state-of-the-art recording studio built into a converted 18th century barn. Inside the studio, sunlight streamed through high timber windows, illuminating a sleek, polished grand piano. I sat on the piano bench, holding a cup of herbal tea, watching a little girl with soft dark curls toddle across the rug toward me. "Mama," 2-year-old Evelyn chirped, holding up a small wooden maraca she had pulled from a box of percussion toys. "Song." I smiled, setting my tea down, and lifted her onto my lap. "You want a song, Evie?" I murmured, kissing her soft cheek. The studio door swung open. Nathaniel walked in, wearing a dark cashmere sweater, carrying a tray with fresh scones and jam. He had stepped down from active international touring management 2 years ago, choosing instead to run Reed Music Group's global publishing house from the quiet estate. He set the tray down on the coffee table, walking over to press a warm kiss to the top of my head before lifting Evie into his arms. "How's the new record coming?" Nathaniel asked softly, resting his chin against my shoulder as he watched my fingers dance over the piano keys. "It's finished," I said, leaning back against his chest. "Miles called from London. The master vinyl proofs arrive tomorrow." My first solo album had won 3 Grammy Awards 2 years ago. My second had broken international streaming records. My mother's name was listed as co-writer on every single copy, her royalty trust now funding music scholarships for underprivileged girls across 3 continents. As for Adrian Vale, his name occasionally appeared in retrospective articles about short-lived mid-2000s indie bands that faded after losing their primary songwriters. He was currently teaching acoustic guitar at a small community music center in San Diego. His house in the hills sold long ago to pay off legal settlements with His former label. I never looked back. I never needed to. Nathaniel reached down, his fingers intertwining with mine over the white keys of the piano, the platinum band on my ring finger catching the warm afternoon light. Play it for her, Nathaniel murmured softly in my ear, his breath warm and sweet against my neck. I closed my eyes, smiled, and struck the soft, familiar chord that my mother had tapped against my knee in a motel laundry room 20 years ago. Little Evie shook her wooden maraca in perfect, joyful rhythm, and Nathaniel's low, steady voice joined mine as we sang into the quiet warmth of our home. When the last firework fades, promise me you'll still look at the sky. The music filled the room, soaring high into the wooden rafters, pure, unbroken, and completely ours.